Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for January 12th of 2024. Uh, Taking a look at our severe weather outlooks for today, we do have a pretty large slight risk for the southeast up into the Atlantic Basin, for North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, northern Florida, Alabama, into southern Tennessee, and back into southern Mississippi. Threats for today do include a 5% tornado risk, which is one of the primary risks for today, as well as a 15% damaging wind threat. Some damaging wind gusts may potentially be strong, and I'll get into that later on in this forecast. Um, but this is also one of the primary risks for today. Then we also do have a secondary hail threat with a 5% hail risk, where we could see the probability of some small to medium hail for today. For tomorrow, we do not really have any forecasted areas as far as severe thunderstorms. And then for day 3 outlook, which is the 14th. Currently, no thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms or general thunderstorms are forecasted for tomorrow. So, or sorry, on the 14th on Sunday. So it should be generally pretty clear on Sunday. As for our for today 8 outlooks, we currently don't have anything issued, and it doesn't really look like we have all that much upcoming either. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast, for today we do have a slight risk for the eastern seaboard, anywhere from Virginia up across eastern Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, New York City region, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, with the marginal threat that does extend as far south as northern Georgia. But then we also do have a small marginal threat for southern Indiana into parts of northwestern Tennessee. Then we also do have a small marginal threat for southwestern Oregon and northern California along the northwest coast there. For tomorrow on the 13th, we do have a slight risk for the Pacific Northwestern coast, with a marginal threat that does extend north of the San Francisco Bay into southwestern Oregon. And then for day 3 outlook on Sunday, currently nothing is issued as far as flash flooding. And then for our winter weather outlooks for today, we do have a significant winter storm with quite a few blizzard warnings that are currently issued. We are expected to see an insane amount of snowfall across the Midwest into Michigan, Upper Peninsula Michigan, as well as some parts possibly in the New England corridor. And I will cover this more in depth. And this does look like it's going to be a little bit more of the primary risk for today, so I'm going to be covering that before the severe thunderstorms. And then we also do have quite a bit of snowfall that is expected for a lot of the Rockies. And then for tomorrow, we are expected to see that winter storm continue up into Canada with some snowfall across the New England corridor. But then we are also expected to see quite a bit of lake effect snow off the Great Lakes there. And then we are also expected to continue to see quite a bit of snowfall for the Rocky Mountains. Then for day 3 outlook, we are expected to see some heavy snow for the Central Plains into northern Arkansas, as well as into western Tennessee. And then we are also expected to see quite a bit of snow coming off those Great Lakes, and then we could see some heavy snow for some of the Rockies. And then we can also take a look at our surface analysis for our severe thunderstorms. We are seeing that classic warm sector setup with a warm front ahead and a cold front behind attached to a surface low. And that surface low is creating a lot of warm air advection out of the Gulf of Mexico here, and that is what is fueling our severe thunderstorms and providing moisture, heat, and instability into the region. However, our moisture, instability, and heat may be a little conditional. It's also there is also a lot of uncertainty with it, and I'll get into why that is. But it's primarily because of the previous cold front that passed through earlier this week. Taking a look at our blizzard that we are expected to see impact the Midwest, and then we'll take a look at our severe thunderstorms that may be possible in the southeast today. Taking a look at our 500 millibars, we are expected to see a northward advection of this trough, which is also leading to those severe thunderstorms, but we are also expected to see a northward advection into the region of concern for a lot of the snowfall, which is expected to support a lot of that snow across the region, as it does advect into significantly colder air, because we do have a extremely strong cold air advection back behind this low pressure system. and it is making the temperatures across the central plains and the northern central plains and the northwest quite cold, getting below zero, and quite dangerous as well. So as that advex into extremely cold air, that is going to support a ton of snowfall in that region. And then we can also take a look at the total snowfall and how much snow we are expected to see fall across this region with this winter storm. We are expected to see quite a bit of snowfall with some regions, primarily in Wisconsin, into parts of eastern Iowa, as well as this portion of Wisconsin here in eastern Wisconsin along the coast of Lake Michigan here. We are expected to see a ton of snowfall across this region. Primarily in Wisconsin, we could see the probability of snowfall totals that could be ranging anywhere from 6 to 7 inches, potentially getting up to 9 inches in some regions. And then across that big area of concern, across eastern Wisconsin, we could see even more snowfall with snowfall totals that could potentially be getting very close to a foot, with it potentially even reaching a foot in the very small portion of eastern Wisconsin. But then we can also see some of these other areas like northern Michigan, the upper peninsula of Michigan, where we could see extreme amounts of snowfall that may be able to see upwards of a foot of snow in some very small, very select regions. But overall, widespread, we are expected to see an average of probably 6 to 3 inches of snow, with it potentially getting upwards of 8 to 7 inches. And again, we do have those more extreme locations. Taking a look at our wind gust models, we're going to be taking a look at how strong we are expected to see the winds for this blizzard and how that may lead to some significant impacts with all the snow that we're seeing. We are expected to see wind gusts that could potentially be upwards of 40, 30, and possibly getting up to 50 inches, or sorry, 50 miles per hour. That is quite strong, and with all the snow that we are expected to see accumulate across this area, those strong wind gusts should loft a lot of the snow into the air and really drop visibility to close to zero, and make roads extremely hazardous as a result. I highly recommend that you do not drive in this system. And even if you do, please stay extremely alert when on the road, as the roads are potentially going to be quite treacherous, as well as if you are taking the necessary precautions, you don't know if other drivers on the roads are. So definitely make sure you are taking extreme caution if you have to, if you only absolutely have to drive through this area. And again, I highly recommend that you don't. And even outside of the extremely low visibility that we're going to see with this system, um, uh, high wind gusts could potentially be hazardous to large profile vehicles. Taking a look at our 500 millibars again, I'm going to be going over the rest of the upper air maps, but I'm going to be primarily focusing on the severe thunderstorms that may be possible in the southeast into the Atlantic Basin for today. So if you aren't interested in that, feel free to use any of the timestamps in the description to find what you're looking for, because I will be covering the significant cold blast that we are expected to see impact a lot of the central plains and the Midwest tonight. So if you are interested in that, please feel free to use the timestamps. Um, but taking a look at our 500 millibars, we are going to continue to see that trough continue in effect into the region of concern with a pretty strong 500 millibar jet streak here, upwards of 120, 130 miles per hour, which should definitely lead to quite a bit of shear. You can see the geometry of this trough is supporting a little bit more of a discrete mode for storms. However, with the cold front that we are expected to see move through this region and trigger storms, even though we are expected to see those storms mostly be triggered by our warm air advection out of the south and lead to that discrete mode ahead of that boundary. The forcing of the cold front and how quickly it is expected to be moving is going to force a lot of those storms up along its boundary and kind of force it into a little bit more of a QLCS-like setup. Even if the geometry is favoring a little bit more of a semi-discrete mode, we are expected to see that kind of be turned into a QLCS-like pattern, but there still may be a little bit of some more discrete storms out ahead of that. But look at where the 500 millibar jet streak is expected to impact the region of concern compared to um, the area of concern itself. You can see that the 500 millibar jet streak is expected to not really be feeding directly into the region. It is expected to be infecting a little bit more towards the north, so we aren't really seeing it feed directly into the region. So that may come with a little bit of concerns, and that may potentially limit our organization of storms. However, we should still see a lot of speed here with this, regardless, and it should definitely be able to help with storm organization. But overall, we may have a little bit of concern regarding the fact that we aren't really seeing all that much overlap between the 500 jet streak and the region of concern. Taking a look at our low-level jet at our 700 millibars, we are expected to see a quite strong low-level jet, and that does look like it is going to be feeding a little bit more so into the region of concern than our 500 millibar jet streak. So that is going to help with storms, but it is also going to be quite strong. So we could see a low-level jet that may be getting upwards of 90, 80 to potentially 100 miles per hour, which is quite strong and should definitely lead to quite a bit of shear as well as increase the amount of curvature that we have in the low levels of the photographs. And again, we should see a ton of shear come out of this. And so far, this does look like a quite robust, quite concerning kinematic setup for our upper air maps. Taking a look at our 200 millibars, I'm going to be taking a look at our 200 millibars because if we have significant spreading of our wind vectors, like if our wind vectors look like they're doing something like this, then that does lead to a little bit of a void in the atmosphere. And if we do have a void in the upper levels, because the atmosphere is a gas, it will take air from the lower levels and the mid levels, and it will rise up to fill that gap in the upper levels, and that's how we get wide scale significant lift. However, it does look like we aren't really having that today. We are seeing mostly zonal flow in our 200 millibars, so we aren't really expected to see that significant aid into fluence in our 200 millibars. However, with the insane kinematics that we are having in our 500 millibar in our 700 millibars, that should those should definitely be able to compensate for the lack of significant aid from our 200 millibars. But then our 200 millibars are also expected to be quite strong, with upper level flow that could potentially be reaching 150 to 160 miles per hour. I can't really hover over it and get the wind speed of our models. I'm not sure why it's not letting me do that, so we kind of have to go off the color table here, but it does look like we are having quite strong upper level winds that should definitely lead to elongated photographs and support the risk for some small to medium hail across this region. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity, I'm going to be going over the when and where you should be able to see our severe thunderstorms, as well as just going over the analysis that I see from our composite reflectivity and what it may mean for severe thunderstorms. So starting off with the timing, um, this is about an hour behind. I am using the 17Z models of our her models, so it is about an hour behind. However, around 3 p.m. I am currently recording this around 2:25 p.m. EST, so around 3 p.m. EST, we are expected to see the storms kind of push off into southeastern Alabama and move into Georgia around 4 p.m. And then those are expected to race off into South Carolina around 7 p.m., as well as kind of linger around northern Florida and move into southern Georgia around 8 p.m. tonight. Um, Overall, what I'm seeing for this, as far as our radar analysis goes, again, we do have that line of storms that is being pushed up along our cold front. However, we are seeing some more semi-discrete cells ahead of this system, and you can see how they are really taking on the shape of the photographs that we would expect to see in this region, and you can really see them start to form a lot of those hooking features. And some of them are looking quite robust. However, in reality, a lot of the storms across this region are looking kind of crappy and elevated, so I'm not really sure how accurate this is because it does look much more robust on our composite reflectivity, but we will have to watch out for some of those more discrete cells along or sorry, ahead of the boundary for the potential for tornadoes, as well as the potential for some spin up along that QLCS-like feature. So we will have to watch both of those systems because they both can can produce the potential for tornadoes. We may have to look at those discrete cells a little more closely because more robust ones could potentially grow to be quite crazy, especially because of the fact that they don't really have to rely on any boundaries to develop, and they can basically just use everything that's directly provided to them in the warm sector. Without the limited use of ingredients along or in the warm front, I mean, in the warm sector, they could potentially become quite hazardous. So we will have to watch for some of those more robust cells in the warm sector. Taking a look at our storm relative helicity, I'm about to go extremely in depth on the severe thunderstorms and the setup that we are expected to see for these severe thunderstorms. So if you're not really interested in that, I highly suggest you use the timestamps in the description, as well as the timeline at the bottom of this video. That red bar that goes across the bottom of this video, it is split up into chunks. So, and they are titled, so you can find what you're looking for. So, if you're not interested in the extremely in-depth explanation on these severe thunderstorms, I highly suggest using those timestamps to find what you're looking for. But starting off storm relative felicity, now that we've covered our upper air maps, you can see that we are expected to have quite a lot of directional shear across this region, and we could see storm velocity values that may be ranging anywhere from 600 to potentially 700 and 800, which is going to be extremely strong and is very likely to support the potential for tornadoes, regardless of instability. Assuming that we do have strong instability, this would definitely be able to support the risk for tornadoes. While we're on the topic of shear, we can also take a look at our bulk shear so we can get an idea of our hail risk, as well as how our bulk shear may help with storm organization. You can see with the 500 millibar jet streak and the extremely strong upper level winds, that is giving us a lot of bulk shear across this region. The bulk shear values are going to be ranging anywhere from 70 knots to potentially up to 100 knots of bulk shear, which is quite strong and should definitely be able to support some storm organizations. Should definitely help with the storm organization wildly, as well as definitely support the risk for hail across this region. We could definitely see the potential for some small to medium hail with a lot of the elongated photographs that may come out of this. Taking a look at our dew points, I'm going to be taking a look at the dynamics and the overall quality of the warm sector that we are expected to see between our cold front and our warm front, and how that may affect our some of our more discrete cells that may be in that warm sector, as well as the cold front that's going to be progressing through our warm sector, because both parties will be able to use up the ingredients in the warm sector to fuel our severe thunderstorms. So I'm going to be taking a look at the dew points, the temperatures, and the instability that we are expected to see in our warm sector and how that may affect our storms. So based on our dew points, we are expected to see quite a bit of moisture in the warm sector. However, this is highly conditional. We are seeing a lot of uncertainty with the moisture and overall setup of the warm sector because of the cold front that passed through earlier this week that led to those significant severe thunderstorms. We are concerned with how much dry air that may have left in its wake, especially aloft. We may see a lot of drier air aloft that may overall inhibit instability a little bit. So we are sort of concerned with how that may affect our instability. So again, this is extremely conditional, and we do have a very big conditional risk for tornadoes. That's kind of why the tornado risk was decreased from that 10% that we had earlier this week because of the conditionality of the setup. But again, dew points do look pretty good, with dew points that are going to be getting into the mid and upper 60s. Not quite bad. Taking a look at our temperatures, you can see that we have some pretty good temperatures as well. Overall, they're a little bit more on the chilly, a little bit more comfortably warm temperatures, which is good for the overall feel of outside in the warm sector. Not that you would want to go outside in the warm sector because of the storms, but overall, we are seeing those temperatures that are going to be getting into the potentially the low 70s and the very upper 60s, which is quite good. Should give us some fairly decent instability across this region. But again, we do have that uncertainty and that conditionality with this heat, especially with what we may see aloft. But overall, it does look fairly good. Fairly decent. Could be better for better instability, but overall fairly decent. The only concern I may have outside of the conditionality of our temperatures and our dew points is whenever we do see that warm sector broaden up as that warm front pushes more towards the north as it gets closer to the Atlantic coast and the eastern seaboard, we do see a little bit more chilly temperatures with temps that are probably going to be getting down into the uh, getting close to the upper 60s, but are probably going to stay more so around the mid 60s as that warm sector broadens. So we should see an overall decrease in instability as that warm sector broadens closer to the Atlantic coast. In fact, while we are on temperatures, with what I mentioned previously about the temperatures getting a little colder, our slight risk was actually decreased a little bit and a little bit more confined now. This is likely because of what I was mentioning previously, as we are going to have a little bit more better heating around this region where the warm sector is still a little bit more confined in the slight risk region. However, as that warm sector pushes eastward and the warm front pushes across the Atlantic seaboard, we are seeing much weaker temperatures and overall a little bit more stable atmosphere. So the majority of our instability, our best instability, is probably going to be around this slight risk area. Quickly hopping back over to pivotal weather here for a moment, I just want to take a look at where our heat, where our moisture, and where our instability is coming from, and that is going to be the warm advection out of the south. So all the brownish reds that you're seeing ahead of all of this ahead of all this blue right here would be the cold front, with a lot of the cold air advection driving that cold front forward. But ahead of that cold front in the warm sector, we are seeing a lot of warm air advection out of the Gulf of Mexico. And that is what is going to be supplying our warm sector with all the instability, heat, and moisture. And you can see that we do have some very decent warm air advection ahead of that cold front. While we are on pivotal weather, I can also take a look at our lapse rates and how that may affect our instability. We are seeing overall fairly crappy lapse rates across this region. We are seeing some somewhat steep lapse rates back behind the cold front. However, ahead of the cold front in the warm sector, our lapse rates are kind of crappy and shouldn't really help with instability all that much. Instead, it may actually impinge on our instability and may inhibit storm organization. So overall, our lapse rates could be better. In fact, it may lead to some negative impacts towards storms and making them worse. And because what lapse rates does is that also helps mix the dry air aloft in the dry air more towards the surface, as well as the heat and the heat towards the surface and the colder air aloft. So if we do have the uncertainty with the drier air aloft, the lack of lapse rates aren't helping with that whatsoever. So overall, our lapse rates are kind of crappy and may lead to some more negative impacts. Taking a look at our convective inhibition, basically what inhibition is instead of getting colder with height, our temperatures as we get higher they suddenly increase with height and then they get colder over time. And that's what prevents the warm air at the surface from rising directly up into the atmosphere. And it is kind of needed for severe thunderstorms. However, it can also prevent severe thunderstorms because it does prevent that warm air from rising. However, things like a cold front and strong warm air advection can break that cap and erode it over time. And if we do have a strong cap, which is kind of needed for the explosiveness of storms, because if we just have air that's freely rising, there's nothing really preventing that. And by the time the cold front were to blow along, probably is not going to be all that explosive. But if it were to just be sitting there building underneath that cap over time, by the time we have strong warm air advection and it erodes that cap away, all that energy is going to be released explosively. So overall, we aren't really having a lot of strong capping in place in the warm sector, so that may overall hurt storms somewhat. But it also may be a little bit more beneficial to the organization and development of more excrete cells in the warm sector. Because they're not really being prevented from forming in the warm sector, but overall it may weaken our instability a little bit. However, with our strong warm air advection out of the south, as well as the fairly decent temperatures and the fairly decent dew points that we're seeing, um, those should definitely be able to compensate for the lack of a cap helping it build. Now we can culminate this all together to take a look at our instability, our most unstable cape first, and then we'll take a look at our instability at the surface. So taking a look at our most unstable cape, which is the instability across the entire atmosphere. Um, we are seeing some fairly decent instability in the warm sector. We are seeing cape values that are going to be fairly decent, getting upwards of the mid 1000s. Again, fairly decent. Overall, a little bit more on the weaker side, but are definitely quite decent and should definitely be able to support the risk for a few tornadoes across this region, as well as fuel the risk for some damaging wind gusts and potentially some hail. But as I was mentioning previously, with a little bit more weaker temperatures as that warm front expands, or the warm sector expands as that warm front pushes north, we are going to see a little bit more weaker instability, and it is likely going to drop into the weaker 1000s and the more upper triple digits. So again, we are going to have that weakening instability as that warm sector expands. But for the meantime, as that warm sector progresses through the slight risk area, we are going to have some fairly decent instability and should definitely be able to fuel our various risks. Taking a look at our surface instability, I'm going to be primarily focusing on the more confined slight risk, the new slight risk area. I'm not really going to be going into the marginal threat region all that much, but I will again be primarily focusing on this smaller slight risk area. We are seeing quite a bit of very quite decent surface instability, upwards of 100, 120, and into the upper double digits, which is definitely quite strong surface instability. Reason I am looking at surface instability is because in certain cold core events, we can have strong surface instability, but little to no most unstable cape. Don't get me wrong, we do have fairly decent most unstable cape that should definitely fuel our various risks. However, with a certain cold core events, we want to look more so towards that stronger surface instability because that can fuel tornadoes by itself. So I am looking at this because it can be a major aiding factor with severe thunderstorms. It does look like we have quite a bit of good surface instability across this region. Taking a look at our energy elasticity index values, this takes together our instability and our directional shear to give us the best idea for tornadoes. So we are now finally taking a look at our more composite models and finally culminating the directional shear and instability all together to give us the best idea for tornadoes across this region. And again, we do have some fairly indicative energy elasticity index values, fairly indicative energy elasticity index values of a 5% tornado risk. We are seeing energy elasticity index values are going to be ranging anywhere from the 2 to 3s, which again is quite indicative of a 5% tornado risk. Should definitely be able to support the risk for a few tornadoes across this region, as well as that extended 2% tornado risk up across the rest of the Atlantic basin. Um, we are seeing significantly weaker energy elasticity index values as expected, with a little bit weaker instability the further north we go. But you can still see some fairly weak energy elasticity index values outside of that 5% tornado risk area, may be able to support the risk for one or two brief tornadoes outside of the 5% area. Taking a look at our wind gust models, we are taking a look at our wind gust models so we can get an idea of how our damaging winds are expected to look for this 15% area. And we are expected to have some more widespread damaging wind gusts that could be quite strong, getting upwards of 40, 30 miles per hour, which could definitely blow around some loose unsecured items that may be left outside, as well as could potentially be a hazard to high profile vehicles. We are definitely expected to see quite a bit of strong damaging wind gusts associated with these storms across this light risk area. And then we could also see another swath of damaging wind gusts up across eastern North Carolina and South Carolina as that storm system progresses northward. And then outside of storms, we are also expected to see other extremely strong damaging wind gusts somewhere else. Across Middle Tennessee, just before the Cumberland Plateau, we are expected to see wind gusts that could potentially be reaching upwards of 60 to possibly getting close to 70 miles per hour across middle Tennessee, which again is going to bring the same hazards as mentioned previously. Could be a hazard to unsecured items outside and a hazard to high profile vehicles. And then we are expected to see that push into the Tennessee Valley across eastern Tennessee, where we could see wind gusts that may be getting upwards of 40 to 30 to 40 miles per hour. And then we are expected to see a little bit of a cold core event back behind all of this. just like earlier this week where we had a very similar thing, where we are going to see this again, where we are going to have an extremely large swath of strong damaging wind gusts across a large portion of the eastern United States. That again is going to pose a hazard to loose unsecured objects outside, as well as be a danger to high profile vehicles. Taking a look at our temperature models, I'm going to be taking a look at that dangerous cold I was mentioning. You can see as of right now, we are expected to have very, very cold temperatures. Anything in this weird bluish, whitish thing behind all this purple does indicate temperatures that are going to be getting into the negatives below zero, while temperatures that are going to, or colors, sorry, that are going to be getting into the very light blues and into the whites and then down into the pinks, reds, reddish browns, and purples is going to indicate below freezing. And again, very, very cold, below zero in some of the grayish colors. Again, a very large portion of the United States is expected to see temperatures that are going to be getting below freezing after the system does pass through. With temperatures that could be getting below freezing tonight as far south as southern Mississippi and Louisiana. And a very large portion of the United States is expected to be seeing temperatures that are going to be getting below zero into the negatives. Almost the entirety of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Montana is expected to be seeing temperatures that are going to be getting below freezing, potentially as or below zero, sorry, potentially as low as -20, -30 in Montana around 6 a.m. Tomorrow morning. So in the very early morning of tomorrow, it's going to be getting very, very cold as a result of the system moving through. And again, a lot of this cold could potentially be very, very hazardous. So if you do have any plans outside, definitely make sure you are checking the temperatures before going outside. And if it is extremely cold, definitely make sure you are grabbing a jacket if you have to. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for Project Gladiator and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being. If you notice anything might have been wrong with this forecast or you'd like to make a suggestion or ask a question, please leave a comment. I do read them. Two other channels that I highly suggest you check out are One Nation Weather and Weather Watcher. They make amazing weather content, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys uh, uh, on Sunday with a weekly overlook.